Okay, so we can come and see where everyone's from on the map and who's in there, but by all means feel free to share it in the chat as well. But I think we're all here to hear from the speakers, so I'm going to move us on to introduce the speakers. So first up, we have got Sam from Cambridge Food Partnership. So Sam, over to you. Oh, Sam, you're muted. It's a classic.
It's a classic, even after this last year. Okay, thank you, Cecily, and thanks for inviting us. And what I thought I would do is set the scene on what's happening here on climate in Cambridge. Obviously, we've only got 5 minutes, so it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. But I think the first thing I'd like to say is I think the exceptional circumstances of the past year have highlighted the central importance of food in the systems that both sustain us and impact our lives, and also what can happen in the face of a global crisis. And we know that the climate change is a global crisis that is approaching with speed. So Cambridge, we have a sustainable food partnership, and have been a sustainable food partnership for the past 6 or 7 years. We're a bronze award holder, and we've just submitted our silver award application. In the rest of the city, the City Council have just rewritten their climate strategy, of which food is one of the key 6 objectives that they are working on, which is fantastic. We've been working with them quite closely on getting this into that strategy, and it supports both the partnership, going for silver and going for gold, but also things such as maintaining occupancy of allotments and community gardens, using meanwhile leases, using planning policies, of which is sustainable planning guidance on additional food growing spaces in new developments. And also they are committed to funding a community food centre with a community kitchen and distributing and circulating surplus food. They are also committed to donor economics, and we're working with them to measure and look at the extent of the local ecosystems. I notice Ivan who's going to look up now. I notice Ivan in the audience here, who has done fantastic work, with being the catering college's manager in Cambridge, and who implemented a sustainable food policy 2 years ago, probably now, I think, Ivan, and has done a lot of work on sustainable procurement, as well as Cambridge University. For those that don't know, the Cambridge system, there's 1 university and 26 colleges. So the university also has a very robust policy. Here at Cambridge Sustainable Food, we are working on with Sustain on a national campaign around reducing meat and dairy. And in fact, we've decided to frame that within the promoting climate diets, so that it captures what actually reducing meat and dairy is about, that it captures and sort of separates it somewhat from the plant-based movement, vegan diets movement, but actually really captures what it's saying on the tin, which is let's eat a climate diet to reduce our climate emissions. We have done some in-depth work with local businesses, and we are developing a climate module to go alongside our pledge and awards scheme for local businesses. We've worked quite closely with RAC to develop tools that we've used with the local businesses to reduce food waste, and we have a set of model policies for businesses, and most recently developed a self-audit for use with more European ride, but with caterers. In the past year, we've obviously the pandemic has thrown up, I guess, hope and uncertainty. And I think one of the things that we've done quite successfully the past year is promoted a scheme called Grow a Row, which is really getting people to grow food in their gardens and allotments to distribute out, to make sure that people have fresh produce. And I think as we enter into that period of hope and uncertainty, we can take what's been learnt over the past year and focus on the transformational nature of food systems. And I think that if I was to put anything that is a positive, Cecily, in that climate, in the Miro board, would be that actually there's been some amazing work done in Cambridge just by neighbours, mutual aid groups, to set up local food hubs, and they're all looking forward to the future and incorporating sustainable food and climate mitigation in those food hubs. Duncan and Gavin will talk more widely on the food system as a whole. Oh, I've got it. I've got me at 5:30, but I will talk some more. Duncan and Gavin are going to talk a bit more widely about the food system in Cambridge and how we're trying to look at more than just in isolation and the sum of its parts between a co-farm and distribution and making sure people can get food is key to this. And I think the last thing I'd like to say is that I feel that climate change is a symptom rather than a cause of many of our issues today. Thank you, Cecily.
Thanks very much, Sam. Yeah, we started a little early, so you actually got an extra minute and a half there, so you can have that for free. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Sam. And then Duncan, you're up next.
Okay, I've got some slides to share. Before I do so, I just wanted to quickly say the automatic text thing that's coming up at the bottom there, that misheard Sam and said, when she said rap, it said rats. And I thought how humorous it would think of rats playing a role in sort of food waste reduction. Anyway, here is my slide presentation. Okay, right. I'd like you all to just close your eyes for a little while and think about what would you like the food system in your area to be like? What in your mind would constitute a truly inspirational, vibrant local food economy? You can open your eyes again. Did your vision look anything like this? An abundance of fresh produce that's come directly from local farms. A prevalence of small-scale local independent food businesses. Food that has been both produced and handled in a way that's kind to the environment. And for all this wonderful food to be accessible to all members of the community. If so, then what you've just envisioned is pretty close to what I would describe as a local food ecosystem. The local food ecosystem is a new concept in food supply chain coordination, which is based upon principles such as balance, wholeness, diversity, cycles, and interconnectivity. The Food Hub improves trading conditions for local food enterprises, thereby ensuring that more produce or more local produce manages to find its way directly into local markets, creates a fertile environment for the creation of new food enterprises, and thereby creates a burgeoning local food economy. At the heart of the local food ecosystem lies the Food Hub, which facilitates direct trade between local food enterprises and coordinates the supply chain in ways that minimize the environmental impact of food and ensure more equitable distribution of it throughout the community. And there's just one example that I'd like to give you of the local food ecosystem concept in practice. So in July 2019, we started something called the Green Coffee Shop Scheme. In this scheme, we have been delivering products to local coffee shops, most notably an organic barista-style oat milk. While we're at the coffee shops, we have been collecting their used coffee grounds. And then these are then taken to a recycling centre where they get turned into coffee logs, which is a solid fuel for burning. Finally, the coffee logs are loaded into the van and they're brought back to the food hub where they become one of the products that we then distribute. So by triangulating this particular route, we're being uber efficient with our use of vehicles, and we have eliminated inefficient empty van miles. But the significance of this scheme goes much deeper than that. So those coffee grounds are completely valueless. The recycling centre doesn't pay anything for them. It simply offers you a place where they can be dumped for free. So it wouldn't be economically viable to simply go to the coffee shops and take the coffee grounds to the recycling centre. However, by employing this particular technique in food supply chain coordination, we are able to ensure that those coffee grounds do indeed reach a destination where they can be recycled. And we've also been applying a similar sort of concept to things like the redistribution of donated surplus food and reusable packaging schemes. Now, before the first lockdown happened, we were having tremendous success with the Green Coffee Shop scheme. In fact, we were collecting around a ton of coffee grounds every week, and this was enough for us to start dividing the haul. Half went to the recycling centre to get turned into coffee logs, and the other half went to a local organic farm where they were both used for compost and as a medium for growing oyster mushrooms. And of course, our van would return from that journey full of organic veg. So now that the scheme has extended beyond oat milk, coffee grounds and coffee logs to include compostable material and organic veg, you can hopefully begin to glimpse the enormous potential of the local food ecosystem concept. As that nexus of local food enterprises grows and you consider all the different products and resources that could be efficiently exchanged between them. Now, the local food ecosystem addresses some very complex social and environmental issues with its own suitable degree of complexity. So in this short presentation here, I've hardly managed to scratch the surface, but hopefully I have at least piqued your interest. And if so, I'd like to invite you to read my book, Local Food Ecosystems, How Food Hubs Can Help Create a More Sustainable Food System, which is due to come out next month. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Duncan. Sorry you didn't get the additional minute that Sam got. You got a short straw there, but thank you. Okay, in the interest of time, Gavin, you're up next.
Thank you very much. I'll just bring up the presentation. And thank you, Duncan. So there we are. You should see a slide with Co-Farm in Cambridge on the front there. So yes, thanks very much for having me, and thanks for joining in this afternoon. My name is Gavin Shelton. I founded a not-for-profit group called Co-Farm, which consists of a charitable foundation and two wholly owned trading subsidiaries, Co-Farm Cambridge and Co-Farm Estate Limited, which is about co-farming, scaling the co-farm model nationally. I'll just talk you through what we've been doing in Cambridge. So basically, we've got these four aims that we're trying to four outcomes that we're trying to bring about. The one we're focusing on today is thriving ecosystems and action for climate. We have a very small pilot site in Cambridge, which is a 7-acre holding. So it's a privately owned holding owned by a church in Cambridge, which is right next to Coldham's Common, which is a very important green space, public green space in Cambridge City. It's in a ward called Abbey. For those of you that know Cambridge well, it's quite a deprived ward in national terms. It's in the lowest 20% on the indices of deprivation, and food poverty was already quite a significant, or food insecurity was a significant issue in Abbey prior to the pandemic, and obviously kind of getting a bit worse since the pandemic struck. I'm not going to talk you around this business model here for Co-Farm, but I'm happy to do so for those of you who want to connect after the presentation. I just wanted to tell you a bit about our story, really. We started, we incorporated on World Food Day in 2019, October 2019. We started with a, in October of 2019, that's right. We started in March of the same year, in 2019, just asking people, did they want a community farm for Cambridge? And the answer was a resounding yes. So we worked with about over 300 people over the course of about a year to co-create the designs for that first community farm for Cambridge City. And so we had great support from a local architects firm, RH Partnership Architects, who worked to translate the community's wishes into a set of design concepts for our little 7-acre holding in Abbey. And this is what the community and the architects came up with together, splitting the site into kind of main growing area in the centre there, so a 2-acre market garden, with the aim of being as productive as we possibly could on a small space of land, but also optimising the site for biodiversity, for natural capital, for carbon capture, and for health and well-being, for it to be a very magic place for people to come and spend time. So this is the design that we've come up with and that we started implementing last year. I won't talk you through all aspects of the design there because there's a bit to digest, but this is some of the infrastructure that we haven't yet started implementing, a community barn, etc. But I will tell you about what happened when coronavirus struck in March last year. We knew that we already had a good few hundred people that were really enthusiastic about the idea of the farm, and we had a difficult decision about what to do. But the resounding answer came back from everyone: let's just go for it and grow as much food as we possibly can, and then donate all of it to the community food hubs that Cambridge Sustainable Food coordinate across the city. So eight community food hubs. That picture here, that if you can see my mouse swirling around, that's our very first harvest of a few bits and pieces on the table there. But we went on to produce about 4.5 tons of locally produced produce, valued at over about £21,000, all of which went out through the community hubs as part of our commitment to the COVID emergency. These guys here, this is Peter Rapson and Dominic Walsh. Pete, they're both amazing growers, extraordinary horticulturists. They've been leading all of the growing on the site, and we've been working alongside 200 or so volunteers throughout the space of the last 12 months or so. So we took basically a disused field and transformed it into a really thriving market garden in that space of time. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of emphasise this afternoon, actually, and I think this goes to the earlier question about what makes you feel hopeful about climate change. Spending time at this farm makes me feel hopeful about climate change, because or about the climate, because you don't need to do very much, and things can transform very quickly. You know, this was, as I say, an overgrown field. It's become incredibly productive. We've transformed the site in terms of 1 minute or
30 seconds, unfortunately.
30 seconds, there we are. Okay, so that's all right. That's okay. So yeah, it's become a place that you know, people love to be, and certainly biodiversity loves to be as well. So we've got a huge amount of wild pollinating insects on the site, and that was all from 0.66 acres of the site. And this year we will double everything basically. So we'll have, you know, over 6,000 hours of volunteer input, more than 9 tons of produce coming off that site. And we grew 55 varieties of vegetables. I don't think we'll double that this year, but all with food meters, not food miles, and absolutely no use of any chemical pesticides or herbicides. So so thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion as it unfolds.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gavin. There's a few comments in the chat box because I think there's some aliens that are kind of feeding into your microphone, and it's kind of a nice kind of whale song, but it was kind of quite calming. So you're fine.
I've heard that before.
Okay, so next up we have Emily. Over to you, Emily.
Hi there, everyone. It's great to be here and speaking today. My name is Emily. I'm speaking here more on a personal level, but I work as a student director at Youth for Nature. So I'm here to talk about the link between climate, food, and just transition. So first of all, for those of you who are new to the concept, because it's not super used, I mean, it's been around particularly for 3-4 years, but just transition refers to the impact of like the transition to a decarbonized or like net zero economies, particularly the impact on like workers in particularly highly polluting or highly emitting sectors. So at the moment, there's growingly more attention being paid about how workers in the energy sectors, for example, are going to be affected by a transition to a zero carbon economy, particularly when thinking about the Green Deal that some countries are proposing in the UK and associated organizations. However, the main thing is when it comes to agriculture and food, the issue is not as explored, and the reasons go back to there are two levels to this. One, the complicated relationship between the food system and climate change, and two, the complicated relationship between labor and the food system. So when it comes to climate change and the food system, as many of us may know, agri-food systems have a very double-edged relationship with the climate change, because on the one hand, they are badly impacted by climate change, but on the other hand, it's estimated that up to 37% of greenhouse emissions are coming from the food system sector. So it's a very difficult relationship. It's not like food is a basic need for everyone, but also the production of how we produce food currently at present across the world is contributing massively to the problem. And this a lot of times creates difficulties at a policy level, which is why if you think about like international climate negotiations, like the UN conference at the COP, for example, that is going to happen in Glasgow this year in the UK, a lot of times agriculture is not very much spoken about in terms of emissions. Sometimes it's spoken about particularly in terms of like how agricultural systems have to adapt, for example, but the rest of discussions around food systems are not very much present, except for like side workshops or simply to talk about the need to adapt and to improve the resilience of agri-food systems. But no, there's for kind of like reluctance to speak about how agriculture actually impacts the food systems, and there's various reasons for that. Obviously, there's a lot of big business involved in the climate negotiations, but also it's because food systems and like food industry and agriculture particularly make up a significant part of many countries' GDP, so like countries' economy. So it's a really core industry, which is really hard to transition from. So there's some work going on right now, particularly trying to engage farmers to help to change and see if agricultural practices to improve. There still needs to be more work to help with the rest of the food industry, because a lot of times the focus on climate action and food is on agriculture. But as we know, agriculture is just like one of many parts of the food systems, which go from like field to like fork or like to bean. But the other focus is in agriculture, which is another issue, because there's other industries which also have a lot of big impact. So I think that that's a main thing to consider first, that there's a difficult relationship in terms of policy for governments, like including the UK, to think about agri-food and food systems as like both the problem, but also like part of the solution, or like part of like the impacted. And this creates a lot of difficulties in advancing policy that can really help to have a good impact. On the other hand, another main issue when it comes to labor and agriculture and workers in agriculture, there's often a tendency to speak about labor or like work issues around agriculture and climate action, focusing on farmers, which makes sense because farmers, they own the land, they own their business, and they're the one who take the risks and then get affected by many of the losses. However, the main issue is that a lot of times these conversations completely ignore agricultural workers. And historically and contemporarily, people working in food systems, both agricultural workers, but also like food systems like the meat industry or processing plants, they are often workers that have very precarious working conditions, very precarious labor rights. Food systems, particularly agriculture, they are quite exceptionalized a lot of times when it comes to labor standards and laws. They have like different rights, and this is the same in the
1 minute, Emily.
Things. And that's the same in the UK, in which contracts and things like that are not as secure. So the nature of like food system, particularly agriculture work, is already insecure for a variety of like historical reasons that intersect with gender, race, ethnicity, and like class. And that makes it really difficult to think about IS transitions for agriculture food system workers who are already working in an industry in which they don't necessarily have the same benefits or social protection policies that could help them to solve the impacts of any changes to the industry, particularly in the UK. Just thinking, for example, about agriculture, how many people working on the sector are migrant workers who don't necessarily have secure social protection or anything. It makes it really hard to be able. So I think that the main thing I wanted to say when it comes to just transition and like agriculture and food systems and climate change is that these relationships are very complicated and very double-sided, but the most important thing is that there needs to be a big emphasis on how workers, not simply farmers, but workers on the food systems are going to be affected by these transitions we keep speaking about, because even in sustainable systems, there's a danger that workers will still be badly affected by these transitions or exploited or negatively impacted. So that's the main thing I wanted to say, and we'd love to discuss more on any breakout rooms.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily. Really useful to have the kind of local work put into the more national global context. So thank you. Okay, and last but certainly not least, over to Nick.
Hi everyone. I'm just checking this is sharing all right. Yeah. All right, I just can't see it on my screen, but never mind. we'll work it out. I can see it on my other screen, so you might just see my face popping over there. I was giggling because I don't know if any of the rest of you are reading the subtitles, but they're sometimes very amusing. Gavin, you introduced your colleagues Peter Repson and Dominic Walsh. It didn't hear Dominic Walsh, it heard it doesn't wash. So I was thinking that was very amusing. Right, so I thought I'd it's been great to hear about stuff happening in Cambridge. I've been a resident of Cambridge for 3 years prior to where I live now, and it's a great city. I love all the innovation that comes out of there, so not least in this sector. I thought it would be useful maybe to take a little bit of a step back and see what's happening across the funding space to understand what we're seeing as trends. Let's see if I can, there we go. Is that working all right? Oh, it is now up on my screen. That's good.
Yeah, looks good.
Excellent. So yeah, Nick Gardner from the National Lottery Climate Community Fund, and I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about the fund and our approach to environment, a little bit about what that means for funding food, probably skip over the examples but use them in the panel discussion, and leave you with some trends and questions. So firstly, just in terms of our approach, we don't call ourselves an environmental funder, but having done some research over the last 7 years, we've actually given around about £450 million of grants out to environmental projects. So that makes us think that probably we should start calling ourselves or referring to ourselves in that way. We've taken a good hard look at our environmental strategy and trying to work out what the best approach to funding environment is for us, and that broadly splits down into this three-pronged approach on the left-hand side. We're looking at our own emissions to make sure that we're walking the talk. We're looking also at the wider sector across and that means the community sector really, community organisations across the country, how we can help any projects, not just environmental ones, to reduce their impact. And then we have a commitment of £100 million, which is over 10 years to be put through the Climate Action Fund. I wanted to point as well to the funders' commitment on climate change, which we align with. And there's a part of that which looks at how funders really roll climate out across all of their existing programs, priorities and processes. In terms of mainstreaming climate, what we do is we give a lot of information out to projects and applicants, but we're also moving from a position where we inspire communities to be the most environmental behaviours that they can, to an increasing amount of requirement. So particularly looking at capital investments that we're making, how can we make decisions which reflect good environmental practice? And looking across the food projects that we support, you know, there's a whole range of reasons that we do support food projects. It's not just about climate action. Really, food we can see is, and this is a simplification, but food can engage populations. And there's a picture at the top there of the Big Lunch, I'm sure you've all heard of. It can be really good for supporting health programs. The middle picture is of Alexandra Rose Charity, where we've been supporting the rollout of their food vouchers. And of course, Food for Planet and what food can do to, or the impact of food on climate change, and how we can make food systems more effective in a fight for climate action. So within the climate action sub-themes, we're looking at the ways that people eat, the types of food that they eat, how we can help people reduce the food miles, and how we can reduce food waste, as someone has already mentioned. We look at food growing, so that might be community orchards, allotments and community gardens. We've got a lot of projects looking at food processes, so distribution, supply chains, local community food cooperatives, etc. And we've got a theme or a strand on food waste. I think the main point is that there is a really holistic view to looking at food. It's not just about pure carbon emissions from our point of view. Engagement is key. Food is a really good way to engage communities, and once you've started that conversation, you can start looking at other behaviours. And co-benefits of funding in the climate space are really key as well. Now, as I said, I've put some slides together for some examples here of things that we funded, but I'm going to skip through them. Cecily,
1 minute, Nick.
If we can share these slides at the end or afterwards, then that would be a useful thing. Plus, we have one of our recipients of the Climate Action Fund, Elle, who's from this project in Tower Hamlets, on the call today. I thought I'd just skip over to some trends that we're seeing coming through in some of the recent funding coming through, which was around on waste and consumption. Just a particular focus there on how people have responded to COVID, and we've noticed that people have become more aware of the spaces around them, perhaps because they're getting out and doing micro-local daily walks, that kind of thing, but passing the same places and spaces which they see might be capable of being used for food. We've seen scaling of pay-as-you-feel cafes, community fridges, and on the more sort of depressing side or downside, and also a big increase in food banks, which is not necessarily a healthy food system sign. I'll point, and there's some links in the slide deck when I send them around, to some reports that we've got for community groups who are thinking about starting up their projects, and particularly looking at what some of the co-benefits of funding climate can be. And the last slide really is just pointing to some questions I thought would be potential for us to discuss. We don't have to, we can cover anything really. But I thought, how can we sort of build on the best bits of COVID? I know COVID's been a challenging time, but what good has come out now of the past year or so, and what can we build on? What is the role of community sector in food? Who should community-focused projects be targeting? I think that's an interesting one, because we look at the carbon footprint of individuals. Should we be targeting richer communities who have a bigger carbon footprint, or people furthest away from the conversation? And then there's a question there about dancing with the devil. That's basically, should we be engaging with supermarkets and the big players in the system if we want to really make a change? I can come back to any of these questions if you like, but I just thought there's a few there to start us off with.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nick. You're a panelist and also king of Q&A, so that's 2 points to you. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we can then move into the Q&A. So, I mean, lots of food for thought there from various different angles. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free to put your hand up, and we can dive straight in. And if not, we can talk about some of Nick's questions. I've written them down so we can pitch those to the panelists. And obviously, as an attendee, there's not loads of us, so if you want to pipe up too, please, as I say, put your hand up and you can come on board. So I think, well, maybe we'll just kick things off, Nick, with some of your questions then. So, I mean, I think with the Cambridge crew on board and various different local groups on the call, I think your one about who should community-focused projects be targeting is a really interesting one. I mean, Cambridge, Sam, Duncan, Gavin, do you have any thoughts around that?
I'll jump in if I may. I think Nick's right. Actually, the larger carbon footprint generally comes from the people with larger incomes. That's true to say. I think it depends which way we want to sort of turn this on its head. We know that climate change tends to impact those in poverty or the most vulnerable more than it does those with money. So in terms of behaviour change, perhaps it is those that have more, but in terms of impacts, it is going to be those, and I believe more so in the coming years, more so in our communities, those that have very little. So it's a bit of a which way do you view it, as to which way it changes.
Thanks, Sam. Elle, I know that you've talked about the project at Wen. Do you have any thoughts on that, kind of from a local perspective?
Can you rephrase the question again?
Yeah, so who should community-focused projects be targeting? So in your context, you're obviously targeting a certain group. So how did you come to target that group? And is there anyone else that you think, now it's being delivered, that you would have liked to have broadened it to, I guess?
Yeah, it's this dilemma about the people who have the biggest impact are the richest, but actually we often target the interventions at people or on the poorer, more marginal end, like they need to change their behaviour, when it's really people need to stop flying and driving. And
I think it depends what the word targeted means, I suppose. What do we mean by targeting? I think there's a risk that everybody needs to be included in the conversation, don't they? So if it's targeting in terms of participation and involvement, and I think, for us, it's kind of who are the communities whose voices don't often get heard, and how can they be sort of centred in decision making and the changes that are needed. So targeting in terms of, but when it comes to behaviour change, the sort of accessibility, not only in terms of affordability, but sort of cultural accessibility and stuff, is very much something to consider. So I think for those reasons as well, we're beginning to talk about it more in terms of community action rather than behaviour change, because I think behaviour change is a bit pejorative for those reasons, and especially thinking about kind of who has the means and ability to change their behaviour versus who doesn't. So
I was just gonna reinforce that, actually, Elle, when a lot of the work that we did through Capital Growth and the food growing, so the first phase of the project was to set up 2012 food growing spaces by 2012, and while we targeted everyone, if you like, in terms of income and ability, so we were encouraging everyone to set up food projects, no matter where they were living in London, and we weren't doing the postcode lottery. But people who are wealthier and had access to networks found it much easier to come across bits of land. So they'd say, oh yeah, we know someone and he's got this bit of land, and we're just going to say, oh, we know the councillor and he's going to give us this access. So we weren't excluding them, but where we targeted at additional support was people who didn't have friends in high places, or were more marginalised, or didn't see themselves as a part of the conversation. So therefore we were giving them additional support to work with housing associations to access bits of land that previously weren't accessible to them. So I think that sort of really echoes the point that you're making. It's open to everybody, but it's actually bringing some people's voices to the table requires that bit of extra work.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Gavin, you've got your hand up, and then we've got some interesting questions in the chat that I'll move us on to.
Sure. It was just to share a bit about our perspective of how we do community engagement with co-farm, really. And I suppose one of the first things is that we take the view that actually, you at the moment you pay a 30, 40, 50% premium sometimes for local, organic, seasonal produce. And we think there's something really kind of wrong about that. So, from the outset, we want to kind of make sure that actually local sustainable food is something that becomes mainstream. And so, for as long as it's a kind of an interest of those who have a very kind of already an interest in sustainability, or the kind of expendable income that enables them to have that interest in local sustainable food, then it'll always be. Someone saying the whales agree, sorry for the background whales again, or aliens. So very much our model is about trying to kind of make the cost come right down for people, So in the last year, that was obviously, it was kind of free because we gave everything away. You know, we really want co-farming to be something which is seen as something for everybody, whether or not you can participate in it, or whether or not actually the cost of you know, kind of buying the produce becomes affordable to you. So we don't have time to go into the full model of that, but we're very focused on making it as accessible as possible to everyone. So part of that was to put out kind of quite a big campaign when we were doing a community consultation that involved the local press. So we did a lot of kind of reaching out to people through community-based organisations, other local charities and things that were already quite well embedded in the community, Cambridge Sustainable Food. So there's a nice network of organisations that do all work, you know, well together already in Cambridge, but we've also been, you know, kind of trying to expand that out a bit. And we've seen that you know, the participation in terms of who's working on the farm, who's volunteering on the farm, that's actually kind of changed a bit over the last sort of 12 to sort of 14 months or so, and it's already becoming a much more inclusive place, but we've got a lot more to do about making it, improving access for people that might have physical disabilities to be able to access the site, because it's not fully accessible at the moment. But our view is that, you know, it should be an inclusive space for the whole community.
Yeah, very much so. Okay, well, thanks very much, Gavin. We've got 2 great questions in the chat that I'm going to give some space for, and then we'll move into breakouts. So Bella's actually asked 2 great questions. So firstly is, how might these projects be replicated? Or
Should we get Bella? Should we get Bella to ask her question?
Yes, yes.
Is that all right? It's just nice to hear everyone's voices as we're a small group.
Go for it, Bella. You ask away.
Hi, I'm really sorry I've been annoying and asked 2. So do you have a preference for which one I?
Go for both. We're here for discussion.
Okay, great. So my first one was just about sort of how to scale this up and sort of think about sort of disrupting the wider food system beyond sort of having these like brilliant but quite isolated pockets of change. And so specifically in the context of Cambridge, I just wonder what sort of availability of kind of peri-urban land there is around the city and who owns that. And I asked that in the context of having done some work before in Oxford on that matter, and knowing that university owned a lot of that land, and a lot of the land was really tied up, and it meant there weren't a huge number of opportunities to try and get local sustainable producers onto the land to be getting food into that city. And so, yeah, I wonder what the opportunities are in Cambridge, and if anyone here knows what those might look like. And then my other question was just going back to what you guys were just discussing about involvement, and with these kind of projects, how we can make sure that engagement is sort of on a level playing field, and how you can account for power dynamics to kind of make sure that inadvertently one group might not be sort of pushing an idea of what good food or good farming looks like on another group, and sort of having open and honest conversations about things like the hungry gap in the UK. Like, there are times of year where it's really hard to grow stuff, and foods are being brought in, and how we can have those inclusive conversations about, okay, if we're importing food, then what can that look like, rather than sort of getting fixated on maybe sort of a kind of idyllic vision of what the sort of British countryside looks like, and what farming looks like from one person's perspective. So sorry, I elaborated on the questions quite a lot, so sorry.
Yeah, but it's useful context, so thank you so much. Emily, I see you've got your hand up, and I was hoping that you might have some views on both of those questions, really, because I think in terms of replicability and scalability, that should all be thought of within the context of a just transition. So I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so actually in my role in Youth for Nature, I do the storytelling program, but the storytelling is about communicating stories of action in communities on the ground. And the whole idea that we want to scale up, use storytelling to scale up that action. So finally, scaling up community to global, or like affecting the whole food system that is like so pervasive across the world, is a very challenging area. And particularly the challenge now is being seen I don't know if people are aware that there's a UN Food System Summit happening in September this year, but at the moment this Food System Summit has a lot of representation from like big agribusiness and agro corporations and like the usual partners and players, and not so much from like small scale farmers, small sustainable community type of projects. And this is creating a lot of tension. So what many groups are doing across the world is coming together to build their own space to discuss these issues, to network and to campaign. So I think one of the key parts and the beginning to start to scale up projects, first is making those connections between different projects going on, so you can learn from each other and you can support each other in many ways when it comes to like best practices, resources, learnings, how to fix mistakes. So that connection with like different projects, I think like the idea of the food hub, I believe Duncan was speaking about it, having a place that connects different projects together can be very useful, but also like thinking about going beyond just the local city, but also maybe national and eventually working at a more international level, particularly to first get the message across to the public. So the public support is also very important to scale up projects. And I think that out of time, the reason why projects become a small island of success links to the second question, which is about it is normally people maybe from like more middle class backgrounds or like from more privileged backgrounds who are involved in like sustainable food production and consumption. And some other people who might not be from those backgrounds might feel like those type of activities are like not within their reach, or they actually may even be against their ways of living and working that they have had. So it creates this separate barrier of like distrust and poor cohesion and poor uptake of like these sustainability and sustainable food productions, projects and consumption and waste. So that's why like engaging with like people from underrepresented backgrounds is key to be actually able to scale up communities, because actually many groups of society are underrepresented in these activities because of the reasons that have been mentioned. So you need first connections with like other movement, but you also need like community support beyond people who are already in tune with the food transforming the food system movement, people who might not be maybe interested in, but connecting as like everyday life choices and everyday life behavior and experiences that affect them and connect them there. And the last thing is something really important to engage underrepresented communities without imposing your views is not just trying to get them involved in your initiatives or trying to be part of what you do, actually giving them space within your work to create their own projects, to lead their own work campaigns, to add their own inputs so they can co-design with you that program or project. Is really important for them to feel like they're not just doing something for you, but actually they have ownership over this. Their opinion and their views are valid, and their needs and experiences. See that collective ownership with the community, and particularly focusing on those groups that are more like underrepresented, is quite important. And you really need to do that at the beginning, from the beginning of your project, because if not, then it becomes really, you have to be reactive. And as I always say, it's better to be proactive when it comes to engagement and like inclusivity than reactive, because reactive sometimes makes it really, really hard to engage people afterwards when you have let them out from the beginning of the process. So that's the connection between both of them, both issues, because they're quite connected. But yeah, like connections and movement building and alliances at different levels, and then engagement that is inclusive from the beginning and like is co-designing with people. That's my thoughts from like my perspective, working with different local projects across the world.
Thank you so much, Emily. Really excellent points. Participatory design is very much the way we all need to be going, and should have been doing that for a very long time. So Gavin and Duncan, you've got your hands up, and then I think we'll move straight into breakout sessions. Oh, and Sarah's also got her hand up. So we'll go Gavin, Duncan, Sarah.
And the whale as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, so couldn't agree more with Emily there about that kind of co-creative, co-design process, and I think that's absolutely fundamental, and certainly largely why we've called ourselves co-farms. Well, actually, it's about kind of co-creating farms with and for communities. But just on the other point there about the other question about land and kind of availability of land and who owns it and how to access it. I've actually got two meetings tomorrow to go and view two farms which are owned by the county farm estate in Cambridgeshire. So I think county farms are a kind of an amazing resource that many local authorities have certainly Cambridgeshire County Council has a very large county farm estate. We're trying to get up to about 500 acres around in each local authority by 2030 is our kind of somewhat ambitious objective, so that we have a kind of I suppose what we're calling a distributive estate of co-farming, which can support people in different communities around the UK, sort of building on that model. So definitely scaling up has been kind of central to our structure that we've implemented. I mentioned that there's a charitable foundation there and two subsidiaries, or one of those subsidiaries is called Co-Farm Estate Limited, and the objective of that is to basically scale up the model so that we can kind of, well, by 2030, which is when we all have to have achieved the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think we all understand we're quite a long way from achieving those at the moment, so we have to be very ambitious collectively. But it's all about kind of tracking our impact and quite forensically looking at what the climate impact is of sustainable farming on those holdings, tracking everything basically, kind of people's health and well-being, whether or not it's actually bringing communities together. How do we know whether or not it is? So we have a number of research partnerships that we're just kind of going ahead with at the moment, like University of Essex are working with us on some monitoring activities, but certainly I think this is really where I think kind of you have to collaborate with lots of different stakeholders who have expertise in different areas to understand your impact in all these different areas, whether it's kind of carbon sequestration, whether it's biodiversity and natural capital, health and well-being, all those different aspects, which are all quite complicated, but we have to get it right collaboratively, collectively.
Yeah, it's making the most of expertise, isn't it? The power of collaboration. Duncan and Sarah's hands have gone down. So do you want to are you retracting your hands? No, Duncan's is still up. Just 1 minute, Duncan, because I'm just aware of time and I want to make sure that we have the breakouts.
Okay. Hi, Bella. Lovely to see you here. Yeah, I also wanted to pick up on the topic of scalability. And it's definitely sort of something that features in my own plans, is to try and take this concept of the local food ecosystem beyond the scope of Cambridge. I think something that I'd particularly like to say about it, and I think one of the things that I think makes it very scalable is the concept of the distributed ownership model. So the Food Hub business is actually owned by its employees and the members of the local food ecosystem, and that means that it always acts in the best interest of the community that it serves. And I think that model actually will help the idea to spread and be applicable in other areas, because the point is that you're not sort of setting up a new business in new areas. You're bringing together the community of enterprises that already exists in an area, and particularly perhaps identifying one sort of anchor business, which might be a sort of an organic box scheme like we've got here in Cambridge, or it might be one of the sort of food hubs that exist on the Open Food Network, or there's a lot of these sort of good projects out there. But yeah, it's about sort of giving away sort of shared ownership of the project, and it's more about implementing the principles, as I say, the coordination of the supply chain. I was aware I only had a minute, so I'm going to tail off there.
Thanks, Duncan. Okay, amazing questions, great discussion, and there's lots more space for that in the breakout sessions. So we're going to have 10 minutes within the breakout sessions just to discuss some questions that I'm going to put in the chat box. Now, this will be the first of a breakout session, and then we'll go into a different one with a different question and with different faces to just maximize networking time. And at this moment, I should also flag that this is very much a trial run of what a virtual learning network could look like, because with the project that this is being delivered through Sustain, we had planned regional learning networks face-to-face, but the pandemic squashed that, and we've been trying to figure out a way to do virtual networking, but it just doesn't quite have the same attraction if you don't have the snacks and the space to talk to people and move around. So we've not been able, well, we're trialing a virtual one, so your feedback is very much appreciated, and I hope you're enjoying the test so far. Nick, I see you've got a hand. Hello.
Sorry, I didn't know how to raise a virtual hand in the last. I know that you want to move into breakouts, but can I just say on the just two really quick points, because from a panel point of view, I think the first one is about engaging people around food waste, and there's a big focus of lots of projects around engaging the most disadvantaged people in food waste projects. I heard from the Iceland supermarket MD the other day, Richard Walker, who was saying my customers just don't waste food. They don't have that luxury. So I think it is important to try and think about, you know, who we're targeting with these projects. And the second point about land ownership in Cambridge in particular, I was just wondering if a huge amount of that land is owned by Cambridge University and the broader colleges. Cambridge University's just come out with a really tight carbon reduction and a net zero target. So it should be relatively easy conversation, I would have thought, to discuss with them how to use the land in helping them to achieve that. So I think they're a key player, and particularly if they own so much, you can achieve a lot with one or two conversations.
Magic. Yeah, thanks very much, Nick.